Hello everyone, I thought I would make a video to show a creative way of being able to assess pupils' learning at this difficult time when we aren't doing exams, no GCSEs, no A-levels, no SATs, and I think with most of our students remote learning, one way of doing this is through something called diagnostic questioning, or you may know that as multiple choice questioning. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit about that, the pedagogy behind it, and a way that you can easily use Google Forms to create quizzes with multiple choice questions to assess the learning of your pupils. So if I share with you my screen, and we'll have a little look and go through some of the pedagogy behind effective assessment for learning, diagnostic questions. So let's have a look then. Diagnostic questions are an effective way of assessing students quickly, way of identifying, understanding and resolving any key misconceptions your students have. For me, this is the most important thing about the diagnostic questioning. And it's also a way of promoting some positive discussion and dialogue and getting the students to reason their answers. And it's a really good tool for effective differentiation. You can tailor your support to students who need it and stretch and challenge others where appropriate. And also use it as a tool for effective planning in the future. Really important that we know that diagnostic questions are not a tool to just tell you how to teach a topic or to replace all other forms of assessment. It's just one thing that we can use right now in these strange times. It's also not something that means you have to completely change the way you teach. That can stay as is normal, and it certainly should not be time consuming or used instead of higher order or open questions. It's just another strategy. So there are loads of places to go for PowerPoints, worksheets, etc. I think we found and probably exhausted most of the online platforms that provide things like that, for example, Twinkle. But where do you go for good questions? So I'll show you a great website for this later. But first, I want you to consider this. What do you like or dislike about multiple choice questions? Some people think that it's not a great way to assess a topic or a unit because children can just guess and maybe get the right answers by simply guessing, not actually knowing the correct answer. But well-designed selected response items can probe student understanding in some depth. And if you construct your multiple choice questions really well, which requires that incorrect alternatives are plausible, but not so plausible that they're unfair, then you can provide a challenge. And questions with more than one correct answer considerably reduce the chances that students will get the correct answer by guessing. So closed questions can be ideal for assessment if the multiple choice questions are well thought out. So let's have a look at a area perimeter quiz where the teacher poses a question, and we're not just going to look at the question, we're going to look at the answers, and more importantly, have a look at to see which is the most common wrong answer given by children that completed this question. So we have a basic area question here. What's the area of the shape above? And then let's look at our answers. So we have 17 centimetres squared, 70 centimetres squared, 34 centimetres squared, or 35 centimetres squared. If you're doing this in class, obviously, then you might ask children to hold up the answer A, B, C, or D on their whiteboard. If you're doing this remotely on a Google quiz, then children could select the correct answer and, more importantly, give a reason for their answer. So in this instance, you can see that although B is the right answer, which 61% of the class knew, it's really important to look at which was the most popular wrong answer, in which case C was the most popular wrong answer here. And we'll start to have a look at why. So if we look at some of the children's reasoning for first one, they put A. Well, we know that they just added 10 plus 7. Some children are able to articulate this, and then you know immediately the misconception is that they've added instead of multiplied for area. For C, here's an answer. I did 10 plus 7 plus 10 plus 7. Now, that person clearly has a misconception about area and perimeter because they've calculated the perimeter here. Really common to mix these two things up. And let's have a look at those who might have answered D. So they've done base times height and halved it. Again, misconception, they've confused this with the area of a triangle. And then really good to see some of the reasoning around children who've chosen the correct answer. Really simply there, area of rectangle is base times height. Someone knows. And a more detailed explanation by some. Again, another question. Let's look at questions to do with multiples, factors, and primes. This one here, which of these is a factor of 27? Those are your answers. Again, not just the correct answer, but plausible wrong answers. Thinking about what you as teachers know the usual misconceptions are when you teach this. And again, your answers will tell you something. So obviously the majority get the correct answer as 3, being a factor of 27. But what's interesting to see is your wrong answers and where the misconceptions lie. Because some people think differently. And this person's getting confused with their prime numbers as well. Some people who put B as an answer have not really understood that we're talking about whole numbers being factors. And then another misconception linked to multiples. They're confusing multiples and factors and haven't really understood that a factor has to be smaller than the number itself. Then you have those children who can really explain their reasoning. 3 is a factor of 27 because 3 multiplies with 9. And they even have told you here why 13.5 isn't a factor. So when do we ask these questions? Let's think of different scenarios where you might ask a diagnostic question. So in class, it would maybe be at the start of the lesson to assess baseline knowledge, might be mid-lesson to assess the progress, end of the lesson to inform the next lesson, or you might set some diagnostic questions for homework. Here, obviously, you can use it during pandemic when students are completing their learning remotely. And I think if you tailor them really well, it means pupils can't just simply Google the answers from where they are at home on their computer. So let's look at this one. What's 9.582 rounded to the nearest tenth? Well, again, we've got the correct answer, but some plausible wrong answers here. And if we look at the percentage of children answering the question, there's just over half correct here. There's a big misconception around answers B and D. And then if you analyse the children's answers, you can see why. Some children think that 5 is the units and 8 is the tenths. They clearly don't know their decimal numbers very well and the place value surrounding those. And those that said D, again, 9 is closer to 10 than 0. So they're really not considering the correct digit when rounding. So how can we improve our explanations to students then if maybe the way that we taught something didn't really get through to the pupils? So we could share the children's explanations. Sometimes teacher's explanation isn't always the best one, or it might be in class we could do some peer-to-peer coaching for those children that answered questions correctly, helping those that are struggling. Or for remote learning, we can produce some videos, either create them ourselves, or we can upload these onto the Google Classroom or whatever platform you're using. And then it's really nice to see those children who understand how to answer this question because they are solid in their learning. So considering creating a quiz of this type, whatever you ask, whatever questions you set, you've got to be ready for the responses, even if that doesn't fit in with your plan. So let's have a look at some different scenarios that could occur and what we could do in each situation. So you could ask a multiple choice question and your answers might show that there's a 50-50 split. Half the class know the answer, half have misconceptions and didn't get it right. So if this was in the classroom, you could just pair up with students, do some peer-to-peer coaching and use a follow-up question to check again. For remote learning, however, you could differentiate your next task 2 ways if you get a 50-50 split when you review the answers to your quiz. So that could be recap and consolidate for one half of your class that didn't get it, and you might want to go over the things and set a task that doesn't move them on. And for those that did get the answer correct, you might want to stretch and challenge those pupils to move further on with their learning. You could, of course, have the majority of children getting your answer correct. So if this was in a class, you would only need some small group intervention with those that didn't get it correct. And you are also better informed as a teacher because you know where the misconception lies if you are looking at the responses and the reasoning that children and pupils give. But if the majority get the answers correct, well, you can move the majority on. Remote learning, you might provide some corrective feedback or a more detailed comment to address the misconceptions. On Google Classroom, you can do this when children hand the work in. You can create private comments and you can return the work back to the child. You can even highlight and add comments linked directly to the incorrect answer. And then for the majority, again, move the learning on. You could ask children to come up with their own questions, or students could answer some more challenging questions on the same topic. It could be after you've created your multiple choice quiz that the majority of your class get the answer wrong. Well, if this was in your classroom, you would assign maybe your few experts to smaller groups or get them to explain the topic at a deeper level, showing their greater depth. You might reteach the majority of the class using further strategies if the majority get your quiz wrong, and challenge those who have got it correct to explain what misconception each incorrect answer reveals. So really pull out the reasoning. And they could even create their own diagnostic questions. And again, for remote learning, if the majority get your multiple choice questions wrong, well, you will need to consider how to recap prior learning, which may have been forgotten, or find new and creative ways to teach the concept. So upload some videos or tutorials onto the Google Classroom, and then re-quiz after that. And the few that might get it right, just give a challenge question to those to stretch. You could have everyone getting it wrong, so you either need to reteach that topic, but you will be able to do that because you'll be better informed about where the misconception lies. And again, recap on any learning and find some other creative ways to teach this concept. Everyone might get all the answers correct, in which case, remember what strategies work well when you taught this unit. Maybe use those again, or still check the pupil's reasoning linked to their answers, just in case it was a fluke. Again, if you construct these questions well, then it's very hard for children to repeatedly guess the correct answers, and you can move the learning on. So there's some prompts here. If you want to support the children, you might say to them, are there any answers you can rule out? Strategies to help them with their multiple choice. Which answer looks the most sensible? Which topic is in the curriculum is this? Or extend those by asking them to write the best explanation they possibly can. Convince you of why each alternative answer is wrong. Explain what misconception someone has if they chose some of the incorrect answers, and so on. So how could this work for early years or Key Stage 1? Well, you can reduce the amount of answers that you give, and children can just click on the correct answer. There's another example there. And another one there. Again, children can explain their reasoning if you give them the opportunity. And then for Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, depending on the subjects. So here's a science one linked to sound. Again, each answer has to be carefully thought out, and only if the child really understands and has learnt what you've taught them when you've been teaching sound will they be able to get the correct answer if you ask for the reasoning as well. Geography question might look like this. Again, some of the answers are quite close. Here's an example of a psychology diagnostic question. If you've been learning about cognitive interviews. Again, you can ask for the reasoning behind this and how they know. This is a good one for an English lesson where you've been teaching apostrophes. Again, often there's a misconception and children will probably choose one as the wrong answer. So these diagnostic questions will just enable you to provide focused, effective support significant stretch and challenge. But it really is important to make a good diagnostic question. So what makes a good diagnostic question? Well, we don't want it to take too long to answer. So I would say no more than 30 seconds. Obviously, if you're in a classroom, you don't want it to be long. You want it to be quick, maybe a show of whiteboard answers, A, B, C, or D. But for online learning, you don't want them to be taking ages for a quiz like this. No multi-step questions, otherwise it's really hard to identify where the misconception lies. And you learn from each incorrect answer. That's the key, I think, to these multiple choice questions. And a good question is where it's not possible to get the correct answer while still having key misconceptions. If you have any misconceptions, you probably aren't going to be able to get the right answer and give your reasoning for that. So we really want to isolate the skill that you're assessing. That's a big consideration for these diagnostic questionings, making sure the pitch is just right. Some of you will have used Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. That's another way of using diagnostic questions and making your learning more exciting. And then we're going to have a look at the website. I recommend this site, diagnosticquestions.com. And I'll just go to that now so you can see. So once you're logged in, this is kind of how the site looks. You can create your own questions and you can search by subject, and thousands of teachers have already created questions. You need to sort through these because some are really good and they've been created well and others not so well. But you could look for a subject, for example, number, and you can then look for a subcategory if you want to. So let's look at negative numbers. And then again, you can choose and create your own questions and use these. And you can also look at schemes of work. If we go back, you can also find quizzes that have already been created. So again, all the subjects, search by subject, you can have a look at languages, science, maths, English. You can search by subject here. And there are also some collections of questions. So here's a great one, Maths Mastery for Year 7. SATS and GCSE Maths Revision here. People have already created, there's a White Rose Maths collection there, or a computing collection. So again, these don't need to be time consuming. You can use them, but I would suggest you check them first. So that's diagnosticquestions.com. So hopefully that's been helpful, and I'm going to leave that page with you. If you want to ask any questions, then you can email me at kim.sheik@bewbush-tcat.com. And if you're not sure how to create a quiz, then you can go on the TCAT YouTube website, because someone's already created a video to show you how to do this using Google Forms. So that's it from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.